Hi there, I'm Brandon from Basic Wisdom. I tutor and help people from all walks of life pass FINRA and NASAA exams. If you'd like to learn more, go to my website, which is basicwisdom.net. Now, I know I don't have the time to tutor everyone, so I've partnered with Achievable to offer a great course available to everybody. It combines their app, which comes with the best personalized learning technology available in the market today, with my knowledge, expertise, and teaching style all together as one affordable product. If you want to learn more, go to achievable.me or click the link below this video. All right, let's talk some finance. One of the most common questions I get about the SIE is what exactly to expect on test day. What questions to expect? What topics will they cover? Will your practice exam that you're taking reflect what you're actually going to see on the real test? People have a wide range of experiences when they sit for the SIE, and there are a lot of different places you can go to find this information, and one of the more valuable places that you can go is actually Reddit. If you don't know what Reddit is, it's basically a glorified message board where people share news, videos, and general stories that pertain to pretty much anything out there. And a lot of people who have taken the SIE have posted about their experiences on this website. I went through hundreds of different posts to find the most valuable information out there and whittled it down to just a few comments from a few users. This video will give you a good idea of what you can expect when you sit for the actual exam. All right, let's go ahead and get into the comments. A user that goes by L2Izzo says, "This test was broad and covered very basic concepts." This is a very common form of feedback I get from people who take the SIE. There are a lot of topics this test covers, but it really doesn't go that far into depth in any of those concepts. BSelf4417 says, "Don't stress on the math formulas." Yeah, I agree. I don't think you're going to see a lot of math on the test. In fact, I don't think you'll even pull out your calculator more than once or twice. The only formula he used was for a stock split, and I agree, this is probably one of the only circumstances you're going to pull out your calculator and actually crunch some numbers on the SIE. All right, let's see what KWheel1 says. "Make sure you read over questions multiple times and look at each answer choice." I couldn't agree more. FINRA sets up their tests always in a very tricky way. You want to take your time, make sure you're reading the full question and all four answers, and go through it and know in the back of your mind that there are some questions out there that are specifically built to trick you, and they're trying to see if you're paying attention. This is great advice. K-Wheel also says you just need to know the basics when it comes to FINRA and SEC regulations, and I agree. I don't think you need to know the ins and outs and all the sub rules of the various rules and regulations out there. You do need to know that they exist for the most part and what they relate to. Now, when we come over to H. Muggle's interpretation of the exam, they're going to say the exact opposite. They're going to say that broad concepts and just understanding the basics doesn't really get you there. And I'll be honest, about 10 to 20% of the people that I talk to that take the SIE exam come back with this type of feedback, that it was more complex, it went further into depth than they expected. When you sit for the exam, you are going to get a random assortment of questions. Now, FINRA does a pretty good job of trying to balance out the difficulty of each exam to give everyone a fairly similar exam. It is possible that you could be part of the minority that gets what you would consider a harder version of the exam, and that's why you probably don't want to go into the exam right after passing your first SIE practice final. You probably need a little bit more practice and a little bit more exposure to the material to make sure that you're ready for any version of the test they might send your way. And this one's going to be interesting as well. Bar MU also agrees. They feel like the test was harder than they expected. They also say that they saw a lot of rules and regulations questions, more so than, say, products or just technical knowledge about the market, which I do expect most people to see a lot of rules and regulations questions. In fact, I'm about to release another video that goes over a breakdown of FINRA's practice SIE exam, and of the 75 questions on FINRA's practice SIE exam, about 20 of them involve some kind of rule or regulation that you needed to be aware of, which that's a huge portion of the exam. exam. I expect you to see a lot of questions on what you as a registered representative can and can't do, what's ethical, what's not. Also, you'll see some questions on registered principals, and that's a fancy way of saying supervisors in finance. You might see some questions on what they have to do in certain situations and what you need to get approval from them for. Also, you'll need to be aware of some vocabulary terms like what's an agent or a broker, or what's a dealer, aka a principal. You're gonna have to know what those terms mean. And last, you're going to need to know some various rules and regulations that come from the securities regulators, which includes SEC, FINRA, and the MSRB. I do believe most of those questions are gonna come from the SEC and FINRA. You might see a few questions here or there about MSRB rules, which are rules that govern the municipal securities market. And as we learn more and more from Bar MU, it sounds like they got a really difficult version of the exam. They also got questions on specific numbers like contribution limits, and I would expect you to maybe see that question for an individual retirement account. They also mentioned time frames, which I assume probably refer back to you have to keep certain things on file for the life of the firm, or for 3 years, or for 5 years, or for 6 years. Some of those rules might show up on your exam as well. It sounds like they also saw some questions on economic factors, like what's a leading indicator, what's a recession, what's inflation, stuff like that. I would expect you to see maybe a few questions from that area. You don't need to be an economist, but you do need to know what these terms are and how they relate to finance. And they continue to go on to discuss their experience with their option questions, which sounds like they saw a few, but they weren't terribly difficult. I do expect most people to see at least a couple questions on options, but nothing crazy. I don't think you'll even pull out your calculator for most of those options questions. So as long as you understand the basics, what an option is, what people use it for, I believe you're going to do just fine with these types of questions on the exam. You will be given a calculator on the exam, but the question is, will you use it? Again, I don't expect you to do very many calculations, and if you do, they're going to be pretty basic. In fact, Bar MU only did 3 calculations. One was a current yield calculation, and 2 were stock splits, and it doesn't even seem like they needed to pull their calculator out to do it. I always recommend that you use your calculator no matter how basic the calculation. You're probably not thinking as clearly as you think you are on the exam. You're in a test center with anxiety, and there's a lot riding on the line when it comes to this test. So definitely take your time, do the calculation in the calculator, and then just move on. That was a lot of good information from Bar MU. Thank you, random user on Reddit. We appreciate it. Next, a user by the name of Seth2 gives us a bunch of things to be aware of. I don't believe you're going to see a lot of questions on any one of these topics together, but you could see 2 to 3, maybe even 4 questions on each of these topics. So if you add all these up together, this ends up being a big portion of your exam. From my research on the exam, I believe the most tested sections that are mentioned on this little blurb here are risks, options, anything dealing with a mutual fund, and preferred and common stock. Those are the sections I would focus on the most out of everything listed here. Next, we have Alaska Coop, who basically says that they only saw the acts of 33 and 34 show up on their exam. What they really mean by that is the Securities Act of 1933, which covers the primary market, another way of saying initial public offering market, and secondly, the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, which covers the secondary market, which is where securities trade after they're sold for the first time. I do expect you to see a fair amount of rules that relate back to these 2 laws and regulations. They also say that they saw 2 very basic margin questions. I get a lot of questions on margin accounts and what to know for the exam, and I tell most people for the SIE, just the basics. If you know what Regulation T is, if you know what a margin account is and what it takes to open a margin account, that's usually as far as the test will go. They go on to say they saw 5 to 6 option questions, which I think is probably in the upper end of the average. On average, most people are telling me they're seeing anywhere between 2 and 6 option questions on their exams. Again, I don't expect you to see too many math-related questions that'll require a calculation, and I do expect most of your questions to be conceptually based, more so looking at why someone would buy or sell an option, how it relates back to, say, stock, and even maybe some questions on how index options work. Next, we have Mary's Muff giving us some valuable insight on the exam. It looks like they saw a bunch of bond questions, and when they mention muni in there, they mean municipal bonds, which are bonds from your state, city, or or local government. And it also looks like they saw some questions on investment companies and direct participation programs. Of the three categories here, I do expect to see a lot of bond questions. So you certainly should know what a bond is, characteristics of bonds and different types of bonds, like what are treasuries, what are municipal bonds, what are corporate bonds, etc. And then next after that, in terms of importance, would be your investment companies, which the most tested investment company is a mutual fund. And last, you might see just a few questions on direct participation programs. And Mary's Muff also saw just a few option questions and looks like just one margin question. And it sounds like both sets of questions were fairly basic. So again, these are areas that you definitely want to put some effort into understanding the basics, which might take some time, but don't go much further beyond just the basics. They also go on to say that we should know account types and anti-money laundering. I agree. You do need to know a bunch about the different types of accounts that customers can open and the different registrations that they can take on, say like individual versus joint, what's a discretionary account, what's a margin account, etc. And the anti-money laundering rules are going to come more from the regulation side of the test. I expect to see a lot of questions on rules and regulations when it relates back to you doing your job and making sure that you're acting ethically in the market. And on to the next, we have Fast Speed 57. This sounds like a broken record, right? A lot of regulations-based questions. This is an area that you absolutely need to be comfortable with going into the exam. And in fact, if you're asking me, this is probably the most important part of the SIE. Going further into this, they talk about the fact that not only do we need to know the products, but we also need to know the risks that relate to those products. This is a big, big thing in finance. Whenever you're going to help a customer buy an investment, it's important that they understand the risks that they're putting themselves into with the given investment you're focusing on. All right, that brings us to the end of the comments there. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of what people are generally seeing on the exam and what their experiences are on the exam. Again, I expect you to see a lot of regulations questions, a lot of product-based questions, especially on things like bonds, stocks, mutual funds. The number of options questions you get really depends on the test that you have. And then additionally, you'll probably need to know a fair amount about what investment companies are. You'll also need to know a fair amount about customer accounts, like the different types of accounts that you can open, the different registrations and the rules that govern those types of accounts. With the SIE being a basic finance exam, you'll never need to be a complete expert in any of these areas. You'll probably need to know a lot more about these areas as you go into your top-off exams after this. But initially, just for this test, a lot of people say it's a mile wide and an inch deep. You need to know a lot of different things, but you don't need to know much about those things. And hopefully this video gives you a good idea of what to focus on. As we talked about at the beginning of this video, I've partnered with Achievable to release a brand new course that will cover all the topics that we went over today. If you're interested in checking out our product, which I guarantee will help you efficiently and effectively prepare for the SIE exam, click the link below this video and you can check out Achievable completely for free, no obligation, no money required, and see how it works for you. If you have any questions about the SIE, feel free to comment on this video or go to my website, which is basicwisdom.net, where you can find out more information about how I can help you pass the test on the first try. All right, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.